Everyone in the military convoy knew James Miller as just the camera guy, a civilian war photographer documenting their mission in hostile territory. What they didn't know was that before picking up a camera, he'd been an elite Marine sniper with 3 combat tours. When insurgents ambushed their convoy, killing the commanding officer and wounding their medic, Miller watched from behind his lens as chaos erupted. The soldiers were pinned down, communications cut off, with wounded men bleeding out. That's when Miller set his camera down, picked up a fallen soldier's rifle, and spoke the words that stunned everyone who survived to tell the tale. Listen up. I'm taking over, and I'm getting every one of you home. The convoy moved slowly through the narrow mountain pass. 6 armored vehicles, carrying a joint team of American and Afghan forces. Their mission was straightforward but dangerous: deliver medical supplies to a remote village while gathering intelligence on insurgent movements in the region. James Miller sat in the 4th vehicle, camera in hand, lens focused on the young lieutenant who was animatedly briefing his men. For the past 8 months, Miller had been embedded with various units, documenting the war for a prestigious international news agency. The soldiers largely ignored him. Another civilian with a camera, an observer but never a participant. "Hey, camera guy," called Sergeant Peterson from the front seat. "Make sure you get my good side when the shooting starts." The other soldiers laughed. Miller smiled politely. "I'll do my best, Sergeant." What they didn't know, what no one in the unit knew, was that James Miller had once been Staff Sergeant James Miller, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, with 3 combat tours and more confirmed kills than anyone in this convoy. The camera was new. The war was not. 8 years earlier, after his 3rd tour, Miller had left the Marines without telling anyone his plans. The psychologist had called it moral injury, the accumulated weight of decisions made in combat that no human should have to make. Miller called it something simpler. He'd had enough. Photography had started as therapy, a way to look at the world through a different kind of scope. Somehow, it had become a career, and then, ironically, had brought him back to the very war zones he'd left behind. Only this time, he was an observer, not a participant. Those days were over. Captain Hayes, the convoy commander, glanced back at Miller from the lead vehicle. "Stay close to Corporal Davis if anything happens," he instructed for the 3rd time that day. "Your safety is our responsibility, but don't expect special treatment if we make contact." "Understood, Captain," Miller replied evenly. Hayes nodded curtly. Like most career officers, he viewed civilian journalists as a necessary nuisance, potential liability in the field, but required for public relations back home. As the convoy rounded a sharp curve in the road, Miller's trained eye caught something the others had missed: a subtle disturbance in the dirt on the hillside, a pattern that didn't match natural erosion. His finger paused on his camera's shutter button. Something wasn't right. The first RPG hit the lead vehicle with a deafening explosion, lifting its front end completely off the ground before it crashed back down in flames. The second and third followed seconds later, impacting the road between vehicles and sending shrapnel flying in all directions. Miller's instincts kicked in before his conscious mind could process what was happening. He dropped low in his seat as automatic weapons fire rained down from the ridgelines on both sides of the pass. Ambush. Multiple positions. Someone was shouting as soldiers poured from the vehicles, seeking cover where there was precious little to be found. Through his camera lens, Miller captured the chaos in rapid snapshots. Captain Hayes slumped over the steering wheel of the lead vehicle, clearly dead. Lieutenant Adams, the second in command, shouting into a radio that wasn't working. Specialist Garcia, the unit medic, dragging a wounded soldier behind a disabled Humvee, while blood soaked through the sleeve of his own uniform. This wasn't a random attack. The insurgents had chosen their position perfectly. High ground on both sides, no escape route for the convoy. Communications likely jammed. Miller counted at least 3 machine gun positions and multiple fighters with small arms. Return fire, maintain position. Lieutenant Adams was shouting, but his voice carried the unmistakable edge of panic. The young officer was doing his best, but Miller could see the truth in an instant. Adams was overwhelmed, facing a situation his training hadn't prepared him for. Miller continued shooting, with his camera, not a weapon. That wasn't his job anymore. He was a civilian, an observer, a chronicler of other men's wars. He kept repeating this to himself as he documented the unfolding disaster. Then Specialist Garcia took a second hit, this one to his leg, as he attempted to reach another wounded soldier. The medic collapsed, still trying to crawl toward his patient. Beside Miller, Corporal Davis was firing steadily at the ridge, providing what cover he could. "Stay down, mister." Miller, he ordered, between bursts. "We're going to—" Davis never finished his sentence. A sniper's bullet caught him in the throat, and he fell back against Miller, dead before he hit the ground. Miller dragged Davis's body behind the limited cover of a boulder, more out of respect than any tactical purpose. As he did, his hand brushed against the soldier's M4 rifle. For several seconds, Miller stared at the weapon. 8 years. 8 years since he'd held a rifle with intent. 8 years of watching, instead of doing. 8 years of telling himself those days were over. Around him, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. 2 men dead, at least 4 wounded, including the medic. The lieutenant was shouting contradictory orders, his inexperience fatal in these circumstances. Without leadership, without coordination, they would all die in this pass. Miller made his decision. "Listen up. I'm taking over. And I'm getting every one of you home." The words came from Miller, but the voice was different, commanding, authoritative, unmistakably military. He had picked up Davis's rifle, checking it with practiced efficiency that no civilian should possess. Lieutenant Adams stared at him in confusion. "What the hell are you doing, Miller?" "Saving your lives," Miller replied calmly, his eyes scanning the ridgeline with tactical precision. Staff Sergeant James Miller, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, retired. 3 combat tours, specialized in hostage rescue and exfiltration from compromised positions. He nodded toward the ridge. "You've got at least 15 fighters in concealed positions, using the sun to their advantage, and they've cut your communications." Standard Taliban trap. The soldiers nearby froze, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Sir," Sergeant Peterson interjected, addressing the lieutenant, "we're losing men here. Garcia's hit. Johnson's critical. We need to fall back to those rocks at your 3 o'clock." Miller cut in, pointing to a cluster of large boulders 20 meters back. "Better cover, more defensible. Move the wounded first. Peterson, Martinez, provide covering fire. Rodriguez, help Garcia with the wounded." No one moved for a crucial second. Miller locked eyes with Lieutenant Adams. "Sir, with respect, you have about 10 seconds to make a decision before we lose more men. I know what I'm doing. Let me help." Adams hesitated, then nodded sharply. "Do what he says," he ordered the others. The soldiers responded immediately, relieved to have clear direction. As they executed Miller's instructions, it became increasingly obvious that the photographer was far more than he'd appeared. His movements were those of a combat veteran, efficient, precise, calculating. Within minutes, Miller had reorganized their defense, positioning the remaining able-bodied soldiers to provide maximum coverage with minimum exposure. He helped Garcia create a makeshift aid station behind the heaviest cover, then began assessing their tactical options. "Communications?" he asked Adams. "Jammed or damaged in the initial hit," the lieutenant replied, watching Miller with a combination of suspicion and growing respect. "Satellite phone. In Captain Hayes' vehicle." Miller nodded. They'll be watching that. Can't risk retrieval yet. He studied the surrounding terrain, mentally calculating distances and angles. We have two options: hold position until nightfall, and attempt to break contact under darkness, or create a diversion and move now. We've got men who won't last until nightfall. Garcia called out weakly from where he was treating a wounded soldier despite his own injuries. Miller made his decision. We move now. I need your best marksman and your demo specialist. As the soldiers gathered around him, their initial shock had transformed into something approaching hope. Miller outlined his plan, a coordinated series of diversions that would draw the insurgents' attention while they evacuated the wounded. How do you know this will work? Adams asked quietly. Miller's expression darkened momentarily. Because I've been on both sides of an ambush like this, and because I don't intend to watch more men die when I can do something about it. The plan was risky but sound. As they prepared to execute it, Peterson approached Miller, handing him a spare tactical vest to replace his civilian press gear. Why'd you leave the Marines to become a photographer? He asked. Miller checked the rifle one more time before answering. I got tired of seeing the world through a scope. Thought a camera would show me something different. He glanced at the chaos around them. The wounded men, the burning vehicles. Turns out, war looks the same through any lens. Miller's plan unfolded with the precision of experience. Using the limited explosives from the team's demo specialist, they created a series of diversions along the eastern ridge, drawing insurgent fire away from their actual evacuation route to the west. On my mark, Miller instructed, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. First diversion triggers. Martinez and Wilson provide covering fire from those positions. After 30 seconds, second diversion. That's when we move the wounded. Everyone else follows in teams of 2, intervals of 15 seconds. The soldiers nodded, any remaining doubts about following a photographer's orders long gone. Miller's expertise was undeniable. Every movement, every instruction reflected years of combat experience. When the first explosion rocked the eastern ridge, the plan launched into action. Miller directed the operation with hand signals and short commands, anticipating the insurgents' responses before they happened. When one of the enemy fighters attempted to flank their position, Miller took aim with Davis's rifle and dropped him with a single shot at over 400 meters, a display of marksmanship that confirmed his sniper background beyond any doubt. Where exactly did you serve? Adams asked as they paused behind cover, waiting for the second diversion. Fallujah, Ramadi, Karingal. Miller named some of the war's most notorious battlegrounds. Spent most of my time with Force Recon, specialized in overwatch and extraction. Adams studied him with new understanding. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because I left that life behind, Miller replied, checking the wounded soldier between them. Or thought I had. The second diversion detonated, and Miller signaled for the wounded to move. With Garcia directing medical priorities despite his own injuries, they began the careful process of evacuating the most critical cases first. As Miller had predicted, the insurgents concentrated their fire on the diversions, giving the convoy survivors the narrow window they needed. One by one, the wounded were moved to a ravine that provided both cover and a potential route back to the nearest forward operating base. Miller himself remained in an exposed position longer than was safe, ensuring each team made it to the ravine before falling back. When a renewed burst of enemy fire threatened to compromise their evacuation, he calmly eliminated the threat with precision shooting that no one would expect from a civilian. Last team moving, Peterson reported as he and another soldier carried the final wounded man toward safety. Miller nodded. Adams, go with them. I'll cover and follow. The lieutenant hesitated. That's not how this works. I'm still in command here. Miller met his gaze evenly. And you're doing your job by getting your men to safety. I'm better equipped to provide rear security. This isn't about rank, Lieutenant. It's about skills and probability. After a moment's consideration, Adams nodded reluctantly. Don't play hero, Miller. We need you to guide us back. 30 seconds behind you, Miller promised. Now move. As Adams joined the evacuation, Miller positioned himself to cover their retreat, systematically eliminating any insurgent who attempted to pursue. His shooting was methodical, each round finding its target with the efficiency that came from years of practice and combat experience. When he finally fell back to join the others, Garcia looked up from treating a wounded soldier. "You're hit," the medic observed, nodding toward Miller's arm where blood soaked through his sleeve. Miller glanced at the wound as if noticing it for the first time. "Superficial. Focus on the others." "Who the hell are you really?" Garcia asked, the question that was on everyone's mind. Miller checked his ammunition before answering. "Just a photographer who remembers how to shoot more than pictures." Darkness fell as they made their way through the rough terrain, each step taking them further from the ambush site, but still deep in hostile territory. Miller led the group with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with night operations, navigating by stars when necessary, and using the night vision equipment they'd salvaged from the vehicles. "How far to the FOB?" Adams asked quietly as they paused to rest the wounded. 18 kilometers, as the crow flies," Miller replied. "Closer to 25, with the route we need to take, to avoid villages and known enemy positions." Garcia looked up from checking a wounded soldier. "Johnson won't make it that far without blood and proper medical equipment." Miller nodded grimly. "There's a Marine outpost approximately 12 kilometers from here, smaller than the FOB, but they'll have medical capabilities." "How do you know that?" Adams asked. "I make it my business to know escape routes whenever I'm in the field," Miller replied. "Old habits." The unspoken question hung in the air. Why would a photographer need to know military outpost locations with such precision? But the answer was becoming increasingly clear with every tactical decision Miller made. They continued through the night, Miller setting a pace that balanced their need for speed with the limitations of the wounded. When one of the injured soldiers could no longer walk, Miller improvised a stretcher from tactical vests and rifle straps, then took the first shift, carrying him despite his own wound. 3 hours into their journey, they heard vehicles in the distance. "Down, everyone down," Miller ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. The group took cover as headlights appeared on a road below their position. "Taliban?" Adams asked. Miller studied the vehicles through the night vision device. 3 pickup trucks, heavily armed, likely a quick reaction force searching for us. He considered their options. "They're between us and the outpost. We can't go around," Garcia said urgently. "Johnson's fading fast." Miller's expression hardened with resolve. "Then we go through them." He turned to Adams. "I need your authorization for an engagement, Lieutenant." Adams didn't hesitate this time. "Do what you need to do. Save these men." Miller nodded, then began issuing precise instructions, organizing the able-bodied soldiers into an impromptu assault team. His plan was audacious, but built on sound tactical principles, using their higher position and the element of surprise to neutralize a numerically superior force. "I thought photographers were supposed to be neutral," Peterson remarked as Miller outlined the final details. "I left my neutrality back in that pass," Miller replied simply, "along with my camera." The operation went exactly as Miller had planned. With coordinated precision, they disabled the lead and rear vehicles, trapping the Taliban fighters in a kill zone from which few escaped. Within minutes, they had secured the area, captured usable vehicles, and acquired additional weapons and supplies. As they loaded the wounded into the captured trucks, Adams approached Miller. "That wasn't standard infantry tactics. That was something else entirely." Miller checked one of the captured weapons before responding. "Force Recon developed specific protocols for vehicle interdiction in mountainous terrain. I helped write some of them. You weren't just any sniper, were you? Adams pressed. Miller met his gaze steadily. No, Lieutenant. I wasn't. But that's a story for another time. With the wounded secured in the vehicles, they continued toward the Marine outpost, Miller now in the lead truck, navigating with the confidence of someone returning to familiar territory. When they finally saw the outpost's lights in the distance, a palpable sense of relief swept through the group. They had made it, against overwhelming odds. With leadership coming from the most unexpected source, they had survived. As they approached the outpost's checkpoint, Miller handed the wheel to Adams. Your command now, Lieutenant. I'm just a civilian again. Adams shook his head. Not to any of us, you're not. Bagram Air Base Hospital. 48 hours later, the fluorescent lights of the military hospital created a stark contrast to the shadowed mountains where they'd fought for survival. Miller moved between the beds, checking on the wounded men he'd helped rescue. Most would recover fully. 2 remained in critical condition, but stable. Considering the circumstances of the ambush, it was nothing short of miraculous. There he is, called Garcia, from his bed, leg elevated, and heavily bandaged. The combat photographer, who turned out to be a one-man rescue team. The other soldiers nearby turned to Miller with expressions of respect that bordered on reverence. Word had spread quickly through the base. The civilian photographer, who had taken command when leadership fell, the former Marine, who had guided wounded men through 18 kilometers of hostile territory, the unexpected hero, who had saved 14 lives. How's the arm? Garcia asked, nodding toward Miller's bandaged wound. Just a scratch, Miller replied, downplaying the injury that had required 27 stitches. Nothing's just a scratch with you anymore, Garcia said with a knowing smile. Not now that we know who you really are. Miller shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't wanted this. The attention, the recognition, the inevitable questions about his past and why he'd left it behind. He'd spent 8 years building a new identity, one that allowed him to witness war without participating in it. Across the room, Lieutenant Adams was speaking with a full colonel and several other high-ranking officers, occasionally glancing in Miller's direction. The debriefings had been extensive. Every detail of the ambush, Miller's assumption of command, the tactical decisions that had saved the unit. They're talking about medals, Garcia informed him quietly. For you specifically. Miller shook his head. I'm a civilian. I don't want or need medals. Maybe it's not about what you want, Garcia suggested. Maybe it's about what those men need, to honor the person who saved their lives. Before Miller could respond, Adams approached with the colonel, in tow. Mr. Miller, the colonel began formally. Lieutenant Adams has given us a complete report of your actions. To say we're impressed would be a significant understatement. Miller nodded politely, but said nothing. I've reviewed your military record, the colonel continued. It's remarkable. 3 Purple Hearts, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor. Force Recon's top sniper for 2 consecutive deployments. He paused, then a sudden discharge, followed by complete disassociation from military life. I served my time, Colonel, Miller said evenly. Indeed you did, and then some. The colonel studied him thoughtfully. May I ask why you returned to the war zones as a photographer? Miller considered the question carefully. Some of us never really leave the war behind, sir. I just found a different way to process it. The colonel nodded, as if the answer confirmed something he'd suspected. Well, your actions 2 days ago have attracted significant attention. The Secretary of Defense has been briefed. There will be recognition, whether you want it or not. With respect, sir, I'd prefer to avoid the spotlight. I'm not looking to resurrect my military career. Understood, the colonel replied. But there are 14 families who will sleep easier tonight because of what you did. That matters, whether you acknowledge it or not. As the colonel departed, Adams lingered behind, There's a news crew outside, he informed Miller. They want to interview the photographer hero. That's what they're calling you. Miller grimaced. Not interested. Figured as much. Adams hesitated, then extended his hand. For what it's worth, I've never seen leadership like what you demonstrated out there. You didn't just save lives. You restored faith when everything fell apart. Miller accepted the handshake, but seemed uncomfortable with the praise. You would have figured it out, Lieutenant. Maybe, eventually, but not in time for Johnson or Martinez. Adams met his gaze directly. Why did you really leave the Marines, Miller? Someone with your record, your skills. Miller was silent for a long moment before answering. I was good at war, Lieutenant. Too good. It started to feel like that's all I was. He glanced at his camera, sitting unused on a nearby chair. I needed to find a way to see the world without a crosshair in the middle of it. Adams nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. And now? Miller considered the question. Now I go back to being a photographer. I tell the stories that need telling, including your own. Miller smiled faintly. Some stories are better left in the shadows. As he prepared to leave the hospital, Garcia called him over one last time. The medic removed a unit patch from his folded uniform and pressed it into Miller's hand. You earned this, Garcia said simply. Whether you wear it or not. Miller looked down at the patch, memories flooding back of similar ones he'd once worn with pride. The men are calling you the quiet professional, Garcia added. Thought you should know. Miller nodded his thanks, unable to find the right words. As he walked out of the hospital, he felt the weight of his camera in one hand and the unit patch in the other. Symbols of his divided self, the observer and the warrior, permanently intertwined. Outside, the news crew spotted him immediately, cameras turning in his direction. Miller hesitated, then made his decision. He would tell this story, not of his own heroism, but of the soldiers who had fought and suffered, of the reality of war beyond the political narratives. Because sometimes, the most important battles weren't fought with weapons but with truth. He stepped forward, ready to frame the story his way, not as the hero they wanted to celebrate, but as the witness he had chosen to become. Some men were defined by the lives they took. James Miller would be defined by the truths he told and the lives he saved. If this story of unexpected heroism moved you, hit that subscribe button to join our community. Have you ever discovered someone in your life had hidden skills or a past you never knew about? Share your experiences in the comments below. We read every single one and would love to hear your story. Do you believe we all have untapped potential that only emerges in crisis? Let us know your thoughts. And don't forget to turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you never miss our daily uploads of powerful stories that remind us heroes often hide in plain sight.